You the electrician? You're late by 2 weeks. That's what the contractor snapped as the old man stepped out of the church basement. Hands dirty, sleeves rolled, and a wiring diagram folded in his pocket. He didn't answer, just nodded once, and kept working. By Sunday morning, the lights came on. No invoice, no signature, just a quiet pew left in the back. Then the military chaplain entered, stopped mid-step and saluted him without a word. If you believe real service doesn't need a spotlight comment, respect below. Cal Morris moved through the world like a shadow visible but rarely noticed. At 76, his steps had slowed, but his hands remained steady. Those hands, calloused, scarred with fingernails, permanently edged in black, told a story he never bothered to share. In Milldale, population 453, everyone knew Cal's face, but few knew his voice. He lived alone in a small bungalow at the edge of town, its yard immaculate without appearing fussy. Neighbors spotted him at dawn and dusk, always carrying the same weathered tool bags. One leather split at the seams and patched repeatedly. One canvas faded from what might have once been army green to a soft gray brown. Always with him, a spiral notebook, its cover reinforced with electrical tape, pages filled with diagrams, measurements, and notes in a tight, precise hand that had never succumbed to age's tremor. Morning Cal, the hardware store owner, would call. A nod, perhaps a slight smile. Never more. The basement of Milldale Community Chapel had burned on a Tuesday night electrical fire. The inspector said faulty wiring installed during the 1960s renovation had finally given way. No one was hurt, but the damage was extensive. The entire electrical system for the lower level, where Sunday school classes met, where community dinners were served, where AA groups gathered weekly, was destroyed. Insurance covered only a fraction. Contractors quoted prices that made the church board wince. Temporary solutions failed. Delays mounted. 3 weeks after the fire, the board met to discuss postponing the annual children's Christmas concert. The mood was grim. Outside, snow fell in thick, wet clumps. The door to the meeting room opened. Cal Morris stood there, tool bags at his feet, notebook in hand. Silence fell. I used to fix this kind of thing, he said, voice rough from disuse. I can try. Eyebrows raised, glances exchanged. Board members knew Cal only by his Sunday presence. Back pew, right side, arriving 5 minutes before service, leaving during the final hymn. Mr. Morris, said Patricia Crane, board president, we appreciate the offer, but this requires professional. I am professional. 3 words spoken without heat. Army Corps of Engineers, 40 years, retired. He opened his notebook, turned it toward them. Perfect schematics of the chapel's electrical system, more detailed than the blueprints they had been struggling to interpret. Been drawing it for 3 years, he explained, seeing their surprise. Notice things. They were skeptical but desperate. That night Cal began. No crew, no assistant, just an old man with tool bags and determination. He worked 6 straight evenings, often past midnight. Church volunteers brought sandwiches he rarely touched. Coffee disappeared quickly. Sometimes they found notes taped to the breaker box. Progress on north wall, don't touch red wires. Once the youth pastor found him asleep on a pew, tool belt still buckled around his waist. Cal had smiled a rare full smile that transformed his weathered face. Church is safer than most foxholes, he'd said, then returned to work without further explanation. No one asked what he meant. Something in his tone discouraged questions. Sunday morning arrived with pale winter sunlight streaming through stained glass. At 6:15 a.m., Cal flipped the final switch. The basement flooded with light. Every fixture, every outlet, every emergency sign functioning perfectly. He stood motionless for a moment, watching the system come alive. No surge, no flicker, just steady, reliable light replacing weeks of darkness. By 7:30, he had cleaned his workspace to military precision. No scrap of wire remained, no tool left behind. The only evidence of his presence was a small diagram taped inside the main panel, hand-drawn, showing the improved layout with notes for future maintenance. At 8:45, volunteers arrived to prepare for the 10-hour service. They gasped at the transformation below. It's working, everything's working. Word spread quickly. Board members rushed to inspect. The contractor, who had quoted an exorbitant price, arrived, skepticism etched on his face. Cal emerged from the basement stairwell, closed, dusty hands stained with wire, marking pencil sleeves rolled to expose forearms mapped with old burn scars. The contractor's eyes narrowed. You the electrician? You're late by 2 weeks. Cal didn't respond to the barb, just nodded once acknowledging he'd heard, and continued gathering his tools. Systems upgraded, he said quietly. Added surge protection, fixed the grounding issues. Won't burn again. Patricia approached tentatively. Mr. Morris, Cal, the board wants to know. What do we owe you? Cal closed his tool bag. Nothing, but the materials alone must have had most of it. Rest doesn't matter. The contractor scoffed. Listen, Gramps, nobody works for free. What's your angle? Cal looked at him for the first time, a steady gaze that made the younger man shift uncomfortably. No angle, Cal replied. Just didn't want kids singing in the dark. With that, he walked toward the sanctuary, found his usual spot in the back pew, sat with his tool bags at his feet, content to fade once more into the background. The chapel filled gradually. Many noticed the lights, the functioning sound system. Few connected these improvements to the quiet man in the back row. At precisely Tizaroon, an unfamiliar figure entered, a military chaplain in dress uniform, here to guest preach, while the regular pastor recovered from influenza. Captain Owen Hayes had driven from the nearby Fort Carson base, where he ministered to soldiers preparing for deployment. As he stepped into the sanctuary, scanning the congregation with a practiced eye, his gaze fell on Cal. He stopped mid-stride, blinked, looked again. Recognition dawned on his face. Without hesitation, the chaplain removed his service cap, tucked it under his arm, and rendered a perfect military salute toward the back pew. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Heads turned. Confusion spread. Cal stood slowly. For a moment, he appeared uncertain. Then muscle memory took over. His aging back straightened. His chin lifted. His right hand rose in a crisp return salute. The exchange lasted 3 seconds. Professional, wordless, profound. The service proceeded normally, though many found it difficult to focus on the sermon. Questions buzzed like the new electrical system. Who was Cal Morris? Why would a military chaplain salute him? Afterward, Chaplain Hayes moved directly to Cal, bypassing the usual receiving line. The congregation watched, curiosity overwhelming propriety. Staff Sergeant Morris, the chaplain said, loud enough to be heard. Is that really you, sir? Cal nodded slightly. My father served under you in Desert Storm. The chaplain continued. David Merritt, 3rd Engineering Battalion. Good man, Cal replied. Steady hands. He told me about you. Said you wired forward operating bases in 72 hours when the specs called for 2 weeks. Said you worked in conditions others couldn't stand. Always alone. Always after dark. Cal's expression remained neutral. He said the most dangerous places felt safe after you'd been there. The chaplain turned to the now silent congregation. That man built more than this grid, he announced, voice carrying to the rafters. He built safety in 1,000 nights under fire. When others slept, he made sure they woke up. My father said they called him the light because wherever he went, darkness couldn't follow. Cal shifted uncomfortably at the attention. I've heard of your work from dozens of veterans. The chaplain continued. Many never knew your name, just that when the lights came on in places light had no business being, Staff Sergeant Morris had been there. Patricia stepped forward. Did you rewire our church because of your military experience? Cal's answer was simple. Just didn't want the kids singing in the dark. As the congregation processed this revelation, Cal gathered his tool bags. He moved toward the exit, shoulders slightly hunched against the weight of unexpected recognition. The chaplain followed. At the door, he asked quietly, why didn't you tell them who you are? Cal looked back at the now illuminated sanctuary. Light matters, he said. The hand that turns it on doesn't. If you believe quiet work can light more than buildings, comment respect below. No press release announced Cal Morris's contribution. No formal recognition ceremony was held. The church bulletin the following Sunday included only a simple line. Lights restored thanks to one man's mission. Yet the story spread through Milldale, like electricity through a perfectly designed circuit, quite efficient, illuminating previously dark corners. First came the veterans. They arrived individually, often catching Cal at the hardware store or outside his bungalow. Men and women who had served decades apart recognized something in him that civilians missed. You wired the medical unit in Kandahar, said a former army nurse, now the town's physical therapist. We never had a power failure. Not once, even when every other building went dark. Cal nodded. Good hospital, important work. You saved lives without ever touching a patient, she replied. A retired Marine approached Cal after Sunday service. Kuwait 91, Outpost Charlie. You installed the backup generators 2 days before a sandstorm knocked out the main grid. Cal's eyes showed recognition. Needed better filters. Wind was harsh. 300 men kept communications because of you. Never knew your name until today. Each encounter followed the same pattern. A specific memory shared minimal acknowledgement from Cal. No embellishment, no pride, no detailed stories in return. Just quiet confirmation. Then a return to whatever task occupied his hands at that moment. 3 weeks after the church rewiring, Cal's phone rang, a rare occurrence. Staff Sergeant Morris, Colonel Emery, Fort Carson Engineering Corps. We have a situation. The base's primary communications building had developed electrical issues that base personnel couldn't resolve. Systems failed intermittently. Contractors provided temporary fixes that didn't last. Chaplain Hayes suggested we call you, the colonel explained. Said you might be willing to consult. Cal arrived that evening with his tool bags. Spent 2 nights tracing wiring paths, identifying grounding problems, silently correcting decades of patchwork solutions. By the 3rd morning, every system functioned at optimal levels. The colonel appeared with a formal letter of thanks and a plaque commemorating Cal's service. Cal accepted the letter but declined the plaque. Plaques don't keep lights on, he said simply. Word continued to spread. The mayor asked Cal to inspect the town hall before the upcoming bicentennial celebration. The elementary school principal requested help with the gymnasium's failing circuit. Each time Cal appeared, work silently solved problems others had deemed unfixable and disappeared without fanfare or payment. The town council voted to create a small emergency fund to reimburse Cal for materials, but the account remained untouched. When pressed, he would only say, "Got what I need." Perhaps the most significant change occurred with 17-year-old Eli Monroe. He had been among the teenagers who previously mocked the old man with the tool bags when passing Cal on the street. "Hey Gramps," the retirement home called. "They want their handyman back," Eli had jeered just months earlier. Now Eli approached Cal after church. "Mr. Morris, I'm failing physics. Can't figure out electrical currents. Nobody explains it right." Cal studied the boy, nodded once. Sunday, 4 o'clock. "Bring your books." Eli arrived to find Cal had created a small demonstration board with circuits, switches and meters. For 2 hours, Cal guided him through principles of electricity with few words but perfect clarity. His scarred hands illustrated concepts, textbooks obscure. The following Sunday, Eli returned, then the next. Each session ended the same way. Cal pointing to a real-world application, Eli solving a practical problem. After 6 weeks, Eli's physics grade rose from D to B+. More importantly, he began carrying a small toolkit in his backpack. One evening, Cal opened a drawer and removed a larger set, professional grade, organized in a canvas roll identical to military issue. Without ceremony, he handed it to Eli. "It's yours now," he said, "but start with the little wires. Big ones can kill you if you rush." At Christmas, the children's concert proceeded as planned in the fully illuminated basement. Cal attended not in his usual back pew, but standing at the rear wall watching lights he had installed and illuminate young faces as they sang. A Vietnam-era veteran stood beside him, leaned close to whisper, "You wired every outpost we slept in. Still feels like home when I see good lighting." Cal didn't respond verbally, but for the first time in years, his eyes glistened slightly. After the concert, a small girl approached him with a hand-drawn card. Inside, a childish sketch of a light bulb with rays extending outward. Beneath it, careful letters spelled, "Thank you for the light." Cal carried that card in his notebook from that day forward. Cal continued his Sunday ritual back pew right side 5 minutes early, leaving during the final hymn. Only now people noticed, not with fanfare but with quiet nods of recognition, with space respectfully maintained on either side of him, with occasional small gifts left on his usual spot. A travel mug of coffee, a package of premium fuses, once a perfectly knitted pair of gloves, sized for hands that worked outdoors. The church board, in a private gesture that suited Cal's nature, added small metal stickers to every light fixture in the building, simple circles bearing the initials D. No announcement accompanied this change. No explanation was offered to visitors who inquired. Everyone who needed to understand understood. Eli Monroe began spending Saturday afternoons at Cal's bungalow, learning the fundamentals of electrical work. Cal's teaching style remained minimal demonstration, observation, correction, without criticism. He rarely praised verbally, but his slight nod when a job was done right carried more weight than effusive compliments. "Why don't you talk more about what you did?" Eli asked once. "In the military, I mean. Sounds like you were a big deal." Cal continued sorting of resistors by value eyes on his work. "Too busy doing to talk about doing. But don't you want people to know Rome?" Cal looked up. "People who need to know know." On the 1-year anniversary of the church rewiring, the pastor made an unusual request during Sunday service. At precisely 10:17 a.m., the moment when light had first returned to the basement, the entire congregation stood, while every electrical system was deliberately shut down for exactly 60 seconds. 1 minute of chosen darkness to honor the man who had refused to let them remain in it. When the lights returned, all eyes turned to Cal's pew. For once, he didn't look away or deflect the attention. He simply nodded once, acknowledging not the praise but the understanding behind it. Winter turned to spring, then summer, then fall, then winter again. Cal's movement slowed. His hands, though still precise, took longer to complete familiar tasks. Eli took on more responsibilities, now handling simple repair calls throughout town, while Cal supervised from a distance. On a quiet Tuesday morning in December, Eli arrived for their regular session to find Cal's door unlocked, but Cal absent. In the workshop, evidence of a project abandoned mid-task. A disassembled lamp, tools laid out in perfect order, notebook open to a fresh diagram. In his bedroom, Cal lay peacefully, hands folded across his chest as if waiting for his inspection. The chapel bells rang 12 times that afternoon, one for each decade of a life spent bringing light to dark places. At the funeral, the military chaplain delivered a eulogy, remarkable for its brevity and power. "We speak of light, but we forget who gives us the switch." Cal's tool bags were given to Eli, his notebook to the church archives. On the breaker panel in the basement, his last handwritten note remains laminated and permanently affixed. "Always test ground first. That's where people fall." Subscribe to Steel Heart Stories if you believe some missions never end. They just move into the walls around us.